Thank you very much, Esther Githu-Ewart, and of course, welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, which is coming to you live from Washington. Yeah, Chris, of course, they are, again, supporters of no term limits, who cite the example, for example, of parliamentary systems in Europe, of a parliamentary system in Singapore, where Lee Kuan Yew was prime minister for 31 years. But when you look at the 31 years that Lee Kuan Yew was prime minister and the parliamentary system, of course, you can also see the results. He was able, for example, to develop his city-state from a poor third world country to a first world. And this is also a country, for those who talk about having ethnic differences. You also had the Malay, who were the majority, very underdeveloped. You had the Indians and the Chinese, of course, of whom he belonged to. But he was able to come out and work with the Malays so as to help him so that both can help develop Singapore. And that was able to happen. So what happens to Africa, especially a country like yours, where you have had one president, if I remember correctly, since 1982. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it's very sad. Mm-hmm. You know, I think you've just made the case for why a lot of these autocrats are swimming against the current of modern-day Africa, because they can pick and choose little things that give them comfort. You know, they can pick out the parliamentary system, but at the same time, they're putting in place strong presidential systems with a lot of power concentrated in the hands of one individual.
Correct.
But ultimately, they're swimming against history. And the younger generation of Africans want to be governed differently. And ultimately, at some point, as we saw in Burkina Faso, you know, people are going to rise up to ask for the political space for them to be able to contribute to the development of their countries. And I would hate for a situation where some of these leaders would find themselves, as is the current case with Blaise Compaoré, who had been in power for close to 3 decades, but now who is without a home. And that's not what we ought to be seeing of our leaders. And they ought to recognize that they're swimming against the tide of history, and they should create the environment for young Africans to contribute positively to the development of their countries.
The longest-serving president, at least so far, is, of course, Equatorial Guinea's Theodore Obiang Osongo. But when I met him last time, I frankly didn't get the sense that this man was enjoying his position. It looked like he was, in fact, enduring.
You know, a couple of years ago, the National Democratic Institute, NDI, had convened a meeting of 17 former African heads of states in Bamako, Mali, to discuss political transitions on the continent. And these were former African heads of states, well respected, who had made a positive contribution to political developments in their countries. And it was a fascinating 4-day, you know, high-level panel discussions where these leaders were very frank. And they really wanted to convey the message to their peers and to other African leaders that it's life after State House, and that once you've served your country well, you can leave power and you can enjoy your children and grandchildren, and you can go around and relax and be healthy and happy, rather than stay in and look like you're hemmed into a situation where you're not enjoying it, and the country, you're not also allowing the opportunity for your country to move forward. So when you see former African leaders, you know, involved in peacekeeping negotiations, mediation efforts, election observation, public health campaigns, it's wonderful to see. And I think that's the kind of message that we should be conveying to the half-dozen or so sit-tight presidents who are still holding on to the hem of power in their countries, even though they've outlived their usefulness. In
fact, I met two distinguished former African presidents in the Ugandan capital, Kampala, about a month ago, who had gone to observe elections there. It was the man from Abiyokuta himself.
Yes,
of course, General Olusegun Obasanjo retired, but certainly not tired.
Yes.
And there was former Zambian President Rupia Banda, a great man, of course, who conceded defeat, Absolutely. An incumbent president, Absolutely. Conceding defeat with grace. These guys were there, they were enjoying themselves, and we're just talking and they were enjoying their life.
Absolutely, and that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be, and a lot of them could write memoirs for the younger generation of Africans. They could create foundations and talk about leadership for young Africans. They could do wonderful things, and help us give us our dignity and a place of pride with other continents of the world, where we can say, you know, we are not a continent where we have to fight and kill people over political leadership. We're a continent where leaders serve their time and then move on and then continue to make a contribution to humanity.
So what do these presidents fear, really? Again, we're talking about Teodoro Obiang of Equatorial Guinea, who actually runs the country like a personal farm. In fact, his son is his vice president and what have you. You know the rest of the story. You can go down to Angola, José dos Santos, who is now saying that in about 2 years' time, he's going to call it a day after 40 years of being a presidential monarch. And of course, when you look at the development, there's almost nothing there, really, for the majority of the people. Then you go, of course, to Zimbabwe. You know what the story is. You go to, of course, Cameroon. You go to Uganda, and you go down to Sudan and a lot of other countries, including, in fact, Congo, Brazzaville. Now it is called the Republic of Congo, with all the oil and all that kind of stuff. Very few people, really. And yet, it is like the epicenter of poverty in Brazzaville. Any particular reason why these people hang on to power? Is it because perhaps their positions have probably made them commit some crimes? That they fear that if they leave State House, they have no immunity, they could probably end up somewhere in prison or something?
You know, that as well, I would say that as well, but the most important aspect of it, as I said earlier, is more, the power is juicy. You know, people want to be there because once you get the power, you get everybody, you get the power over all your civilian, all your people. You are the most powerful human being there at the time. And it's really difficult for people to just step down, even though they have already acquired the most wealth to themselves and their family. They still believe that, because that's what they have known all their life. And it's difficult to be detached from that. And I believe that's where the youngest generation, the civil society, should get up and say, it is time for those people to go and retire. And, you know, and let the place for the younger generation to come up and improve things for the countries.
There are a lot of books that have been written by people who have tested power, and some of them, in fact, call it an illusion. It is something, frankly, you can't control. The Chinese have a saying about fame, which says that men dread fame.
Correct.
Just like a pig dreads fattening, for both could be a prelude to slaughter.
I totally agree. I totally agree. That's the way it is.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, we can end this program where we started on a happy note with Benin, to say that, you know, by 1990, there were only 3 African heads of states who had relinquished power. That was Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Leopold Sedar Senghor of Senegal, and Amadou Ahidjo of Cameroon. They were the only 3. Now, 20 years after, a lot more African presidents have relinquished power, either because they've been term limited, or they've lost elections and accepted the outcome, or they voluntarily, like Nelson Mandela, decided not to seek re-election. So the tide is going in the positive direction, and we're now counting not 50 or 51 presidents who are sitting tight, but half a dozen autocrats who are still sitting tight. So the tide is moving in the right direction. Right. And my hope is that as the continent continues to get awareness, as civil society continues to speak out, that we would make the message clear to all of these leaders that when your time is up, it's about time to leave. And then we can urge the African Union, you know, which is the continental body, to say that presidents such as Macky Sall, such as Patrice Talon, and other younger leaders should take this debate into the African Union, and to say that if the African Union has a charter on democracy, elections, and governance, which is a very progressive document, it should make sure that it's respected by all of the African leaders.
But how is that possible when, in fact, the African Union has no sovereign status? You know, as well as I do, that the African Union really is a reflection of the sum total of its membership. And the sum total of its membership, you know what it is.
Well, you know, you know, with this 54, a conglomerate of 54 leaders, sometimes it can be very unwieldy and difficult to make decisions. However, having been entrusted as the continental body, and having had the courage to put in place its own mechanisms, they should enforce what they've agreed upon. That's, you know, because we are, as Africans are tired of people coming from other continents to give us lectures when we could do these things ourselves and make our continent look good for it.
Unfortunately, time happens not to be our best ally. On that note, thanks to our distinguished guests, Hermine Zossooungbo, founder of the African Immigrants Organization, and Christopher Formunyoh, Senior Associate and Regional Director for Central and West Africa at the National Democratic Institute. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners, we thank you for tuning in.